sometimes when I do these reviews, I'm caught between having a totally political rant and like sticking to the music. But I've learned the delicate balance of realizing that everything is politics, and that even when I'm speaking solely to the music and the artistic integrity, it cannot be divorced from the impact of the music socially and the power driven from the music, and even most importantly, the sense of power an artist gets, one, from making music, and two, from giving it to people who later become supporters, fans, and as we know today, fam. So forgive me, or at least appreciate me, learn to, if I will in a lot of instances deliberately involve these two issues together. Everything is politics, and I feel like living at the precipice of a so-called post-apartheid South Africa, where we have experienced everything from the fall of the Rainbow Nation illusion to the rise of xenophobia to an increase in a whole lot of issues that do not make us feel we live in a country that accepts and appreciates us. The Headspace is not going to be a platform that solely dedicates itself to addressing popular culture at the expense of real important issues. I want to have a talk again. Last time I talked about Simulation Raps and his amazing project Live from Elokshin, and how it didn't really sound like it came live from Elokshin. Or maybe in it coming live from Elokshin, there's something we need to inspect about what the Lokishi has become. Do we live in a generation that has now thoroughly become taken over by global syndication and American pop culture in terms of the musical influences? I say no, because we still have piano. But since this is a South African hip-hop channel, I'm here to address rappers and any practitioner of the hip-hop art form. Be you b-boy, be you graph writer, be you entrepreneur. The standard that I think by extension all of the members of the team of the Headspace have come to use in our valuation of great hip-hop art in the context of South Africa is how much it empowers the culture. And the culture can be a very vague term. What do we mean when we say the culture? We mean a lot of things. Yes, we are talking about hip-hop. Yes, we are talking about South Africanness. And in a way, those things are one and the same. Because check this. Culture does not have contrary to popular belief. Hey, English code, yeah, but contrary to popular belief, culture does not have stringent, rigid limits where you can say, I have passed Ubuxhosa, I am skipping over to Ubuzulu. And I feel like this is yet another one of those things that keep South Africans aback, because if we really notice it, we've taken so much from each other. We've learned so much from each other that nowadays it is common to hear a quote-unquote Xhosa person use Zulu terms, use Sesotho terms, especially if we look at capitals that have become cultural milieus like Johannesburg, where people there identify more to their Gautengness than anything else, and it just becomes a myth. And there's nothing wrong with myths. Myths help remind us how far we've gone, but culture is what we actively live according to and have in our mind, which is why I accuse a lot of artists of living according to capitalism and not really considering the mythologies they use and how it can empower their own people. Zoop! Back to the music, guys. I'm talking about somebody who dares to call himself the Xhosa trap originator. Now, whenever somebody said they started something, it creates a hectic investigation about whether or not that is a legitimate thing to state. I won't talk about that claim here. That's going to be another episode that deserves its own time and its own energy. I do want to talk about this man's dynamic album. I'm talking about none other than King Joe with the album Jongisizwe. Actually, I should probably be saying Jongisizwe, because quick interesting backstory to King Joe, he's legitimately royalty. And what that does in his music is that this is a person who belongs to the young internet generation, but also is very anchored in their traditions. You can tell he's been taught from an early age, value where you come from, take a little bit of it wherever you go. Don't take over the world without understanding where you come from. He's showing us that as we appropriate, the most important thing is to understand where the center of our orientation lies. If we still move with the blood and the spirit of our ancestors, we are guided by something that might be greater than us. King Joe displays this in an album which enters off like a freaking movie. And I mean, he's painting the picture of the importance of who he is, his culture, his mythological alliances. And he creates this mythology, in fact, this great story of a man. When I listened to this album, I felt like he might be holding Lean on one side and a big Excalibur sword on the other, because this guy manages to warp together a magical realism that paints his youthful abandonment with a sense of cultural reflection. This is a guy who's enjoying his youth. He's fucking bitches, he's killing rappers, and he's taking names. But he's doing that all in understanding that Jongisizwe, motherfuckers. And what that means is that everything I do is the footprint of my ancestors. And if I'm going to do this trap thing well, I'm going to make sure the beats carry a little bit of that. And you hear that throughout the album. There are splashes of there are drums used in the right places. It isn't an album that really typically tries to be Afro-inspired, but it sinks these things in the right places. And it's incredible because when you say to a lot of artists, try and respond to your heritage, they do that cheesy thing of trying to remix the typical understanding of what it means to be African. But here King Joe takes this postmodern trap sound and he's able to create that delicate balance where any American would be able to tell this ain't American trap, and every South African would be able to tell that ngeyethu. And this is why, for me, this is resoundingly the best South African trap project I've heard in a while. The concepts are well executed. King Joe, as a lyricist, is able to kind of paint this lackadaisical, easy, careless, sure of himself idea. He doesn't try too much. He's not trying to become some kind of uber powerful technical lyricist. The power of his technicality is in knowing how to use his booming voice, knowing just the right amount of how to flow, knowing how to delicately place together his flows in an art form that can be very busy, because trap is, ironically speaking, something that's rooted in a lot of that high-paced African percussion instinct that we have. So to hear King Joe bring it back to the foreground and create this kind of futurist display of Afro trap is a testimony. I'd go as far as saying this album needs to be the South African trap manifesto. If you are doing trap, you need to use this as your freaking point of departure, because I feel like what he's done here for his generation is create in many ways what AKA did when he dropped Levels, what Ricky Rick did when he dropped Family Values, what a lot of artists who we regard as classics, what Pro Kid did when he dropped Heads and Tails. King Joe is putting himself in a tradition of artists who are kicking the door in a way that says, you've got to know where I'm from before you even accept me. And when you accept me, there are no limits. When the world responds to me, they will know that I come from this country, South Africa, or if you want to be politically correct, Azania, and I represent people who are still engaging with the fluidity of culture, with understanding the difference between how culture can quickly become a myth if it doesn't mobilize you, and it can become nothing but the clothes you wear on a public holiday to remind yourself where you come from. But that true culture, even when we are adorned in modern clothing, is this, us understanding where we come from. And that it is not a sense of, I'm not promoting hybridity here. I'm not saying we're mixing and matching, because nature creates diversity. And what I'm saying is maybe a lot of the labels we use to define ourselves really don't fully capture what we truly are. We are way more than these labels. But since we need labels to communicate, we better choose labels that truly define us effectively. And I really feel like King Joe is more closer than he is trap, and hence he's led by the spirit of his ancestors, the spirit of his kingly ancestry, to come and to configure trap in ways that speak to who he is and what he wants to do. I'm giving this album a 10 out of 10. This album is incredible. This album captures the essence of who the artist is, what they want to do, what audience they're catering to. It captures the element of how to move in alignment with beats that speak to your artistic identity. I really think this is a perfect project because, number one, the self-awareness that King Joe has about himself is able to resonate in his music. You can tell he really understands the creative direction he's going with. He has a very meticulous plan and mission, and I for one really hope that in this age where the South African music industry is trying its best to hold on to relevance by seeping from the internet, he'll find ways of transcending these old media values and finding room to truly penetrate beyond these gates that are so hard and kept by people who don't understand that by standing in the midst of growth, they outdate themselves. You heard it, I give it a 10 out of 10 because again, it's revolutionary. It declares authenticity and it does it in a way that is able to bridge history and the possibility of what might be. So I spoke last time about artists who can be considered historicists and futurists. King Joe began as a historicist, like every artist does. We come and we jump into traditions that we are learning from. But evidently, our greatness, our kingship is proven by our ability to transcend where we come from, not to fit neatly into the context of that. King Joe breaks grounds. You might not like it, but you cannot deny it. If you feel otherwise, talk to me in the comment section. This is your brother from the ancient mother, VJ. We have a South African classic, folks. This doesn't happen often. We have an important, valuable artist, and I ain't going far as saying we need to protect him, because I don't think he really needs that. He probably has all the bodyguards he needs. But if I can do anything to this insert, is help create consciousness and awareness around this unique artist and get this conversation going. Do you think historicism, futurism applies? Do you think it's even a good way of defining this conversation? I think it sets the tone to how we can begin to engage in music in the context of tradition, in the context of media, pop culture, so-called underground culture, to understand where artists are trying to go and how to even review their projects. 10 out of 10, King Joe, Siyabulela, salute.